Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia offers the widest selection of sports cards and signed memorabilia in the city. For dedicated casual and new collectors, Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia has everything a collector could ask for. Everything we sell is stored with care, and with help from our knowledgeable team, we'll help you find exactly what you're looking for. We carry Upper Deck hockey card brands like Series 1 and 2, The Cup, Ultimate, SPA, and plenty more. So what are you waiting for? Come down to Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia, Winnipeg's premier sports cards and memorabilia store. And good evening, Manitoba. Welcome into this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, Ep.4 in Season 2, brought to you by Terrico, Movement, Fitness, and Performance, Elite Prospects, as well as goaltenders, and the commercial you saw to start things off here in Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your night, your day, morning, whenever you may be watching this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. We're going to have two guests on tonight's edition of the show. Don McIntosh, president of the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League, will be joining me first up, and then Cody Wall to follow that. And speaking of Cody Wall, who is play-by-play commentator, the voice of the Winkler Flyers in the MJHL. We're going to take a look at some Manitoba Junior Hockey League news to start things off here, as more so talking about the scores, as a busy past week of action, and it's going to be a familiar sight to see this many games happen per week in the MJ, but big performances by the Selkirk Steelers in a 13-1 victory over the Monarchs, and then after such a big victory, able to come away with a 2-1 win 2 nights later in overtime against the defending champion Northern Manitoba Blizzard. As for the Northern Manitoba Blizzard, they'll be in action a couple times coming up this weekend. But as we take a look at the standings, the defending champs haven't fared as well as their previous season, which they came away with a championship. But as we'll come to find out soon, this team has had quite a lot of turnover. We'll get to that more with Cody Wall, but his Winkler Flyers, 1-4-1 to start off the season. A bit of turnover for them, as I got to learn with Cody as we dove into that squad, kind of outlining them for this season. The Verdun Oil Capitals starting off as the best team in the West through 6 games, although them and Wayway Capo have the same amount of wins. The biggest story, though, I'd say the Selkirk Steelers starting off with an 8-0 record. Are they going to be able to sustain that as time goes along this season? As last year they started off about 10-0. And interesting point that Cody brings up about an upcoming matchup between them and the Winkler Flyers, which will be going this weekend on Thanksgiving, their matchup on Sunday. But in terms of the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League, Don McIntosh is going to be joining this edition of the show to talk about the past season, how last year ended up going. Another successful and competitive season in the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League. We also talk about this season, the road to the TELUS Cup Regionals, where it's going to go through, as well as Don brings up some interesting points about some potential changes to the minor hockey landscape at the U18 levels and below. Coming up in, in short time here, potentially. All of that coming up next on the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. Enjoy this interview coming up with Don McIntosh. Don McIntosh of the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League joining this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. Don, another successful season last year. The 2025-2026 regular season is already underway here in the U18 AAA League. But yeah, touch back on last season, another competitive fight right until the end.
Well, it was a good season all the way around, tight, similar to other seasons where the Winnipeg Wild were successful at the end, beating the Brandon Wheat Kings. It seems like the last few years, those two teams have been going at it at the end. And the Wild were successful this year. Kenora hosted the TELUS Regionals the first part of April, and the Wild represented Manitoba. Kenora, of course, the host team. Thunder Bay was there, but the Regina Pat's U18 team was there, and they have one particular player by the name of Maddox Schultz who kind of dominated, and they went on to win the TELUS Regionals, and in fact, they went on to win the TELUS Cup 2 or 3 weeks after that. So that team is generally still intact in Regina, so they're going to be tough to beat to represent this area in the TELUS next year, but we'll see how she goes.
Yeah, and of course, seeing the media coverage on Maddox last season, of course, being the first overall pick in the WHL draft, quite a player that Regina had, and made it tough for those competing against him all season long, and during that time in particular. That Regina team, like you said, should be strong again this year. But how huge was it to have Kenora hosting the TELUS Cup regional event in the West to get the teams out there in a place where Kenora is usually most times coming down and traveling to Manitoba to play games?
Well, Kenora is part of our league, as you know. It's and it's well from Winnipeg, what 2 hours kind of
Yeah,
thing, 2.5 hours. So it's not too bad. Yeah, they did an excellent job hosting the TELUS regionals, and yeah, interesting. I should add that the Regina team is hosting the TELUS regionals this year, 2025, I guess, 26. So it'll be even tougher competition again going there trying to get to TELUS. So
for sure. And we'll be interesting to see which teams end up representing, this part of the country in that West Regional in Regina when that time does come. But speaking of Winnipeg, the Wild, as well as the Brandon Wheat Kings, like you mentioned, two teams that are usually in it until the very end in this league. Speak about how they've been able to just establish and build the strong programs they've been able to.
They've got good coaching, number one. Paul Kruger has been the coach there for a number of years. Rick Rogers is the manager. He's been the manager for a number of years. They play out of the Iceplex. Well, I guess it's not the Iceplex anymore. I still call it the Iceplex. And they've built a good program there, tied in with they've got access to the facilities there for weight training, and they provide a lot of effort in terms of those components of the game, and draws kids from that area that they draw from in Winnipeg to their team. But they do run an excellent program and have for a number of years.
Yeah, and of course, the Winnipeg Wild this season starting off with a 3-0 record so far, and Brandon so far starting off with a 4-1 record here. Of course, they've been in the mix for the national championship just a couple of years ago now. I guess they were in the West Regionals, of course, last season competing. Or sorry, up until the very end of the playoffs competing. But just speak about how this Brandon Wheat Kings team themselves have been able to continue to establish themselves as a power here in the U18 world.
Well, Brandon is an interesting story because they have a hockey academy there in Brandon, and what we're finding is players from surrounding areas that would normally play, like say in Yellowhead or Southwest or even Parkland, the the parents have established residency in Brandon, and the kids go to school in Brandon. They go to the hockey academy in Brandon. Of course, then they play for the Brandon Wheat Kings AAA team. So it provides them an opportunity to have players come in. Some people would argue that's a loophole in the Hockey Canada residency rules, but we have not been able to contest any of those residency rules, so that's the way it's happening. So, we're seeing a bit more of that in not only in Manitoba, but also, for example, the Regina team there we talked about,
Yeah.
the Pats, a kid by the name of Liam Pugh from British Columbia. He was the third pick in the Western Hockey League draft last year. His parents moved to Regina. So he's playing on the U18 AAA team, but he's also APing to the Regina Pats junior team.
Yeah.
And then they changed the rule there. The old rule was 10 games AP. Now it's 30. So 32 or 34. I'm not one or the other. So those two players, Maddox and Pugh, are playing up with the Western Hockey League team a maximum of 30-some games, and they're also playing on the U18. So it just strengthens things all the way around. And Brandon, with parents moving into Brandon, it's allowed for some strengthening of their team as well.
Yeah, and I know, for example, on the female side, a narrative or something that is in fact a reality is that teams in Saskatchewan aren't exactly bound to zones, where here in Manitoba, that's a bit different, of course, as you know, Don. But I mean, heading into this year, another strong field in the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League. Of course, the road to qualifying for the Telus Cup is going to go through Regina this year. But as we've seen, the Southwest Cougars have started off as the number one team in the league so far this year. Brandon, Pembina Valley, the Winnipeg Wild, a lot of teams with strong starts. Couldn't be
Yes.
much happier to see how things have started here, I'm sure, from
Oh
just a
yeah,
little.
very well. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're right. A number of teams have played 5 games and jumped out of the gate real well, as you mentioned. Southwest and Brandon and Pembina Valley. The Wild, of course, three games and three victories. Interestingly, though, the Bruins have only played the one game. They won that game, but I suspect them to be a real strong team this year. At the U15 and the U17 levels in that area of the city that the Bruins have their teams. They've been strong in the last couple of years. So the U18, I suspect the U18 Bruins to be very competitive this year. Interestingly, the Thrashers, they've jumped out to 2-0 as well. So, it's sort of in a broad sense depends on who you're playing up front in the first of the season. So, some teams have played 5 games, some three. And as I said, the Bruins to date have only played one. So we'll see how she tumbles out. But I think it's going to be fairly competitive among about 6 teams, really. It's going to be good competitive season.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of more games to be played here still to come, and can't wait to see
Yeah.
how
Oh,
this
yeah.
this.
We play a 48 game schedule, a killer kind
Yeah.
of thing. Everybody plays everybody 4 times. So over the season. So
Yeah, and over the course of that time, going to be fun to see how the rivalries ramp up, as well as to see which one of these teams or a group of these teams can separate themselves from the rest of the pack. Don, I'll leave you off with this question. You mentioned U15 and U17 programs for Winnipeg Bruins team being strong. I mean, that obviously a big part of, Brandon's success in the standpoint from where they have their academy there and they've been able to attract new talents. So, given, what Manitoba has in terms of talent and the programs that have just been establishing themselves throughout time, how huge do you think that truly has been to leading players to get into this league and for them to be able to make the impact they've been able to throughout the years from these said programs?
Yeah, well, I think kids. Of course, kids are being drafted in the Western Hockey League at 14 years of age, right? And so they're playing in the U15 program, and we're seeing a lot of kids being drafted well out of the Bruins and the Brandon Wheat Kings area. So that's a testament to those leagues. The U15 league in terms of development, and it only adds well to our league in the long term because those players will ultimately come in through our league prior to they'll at least come in as a 15-year-old. They might end up in the Western League as a 16-year-old, which doesn't happen that often, but it happens fair amount. You see a lot of 16-year-olds going into the Western Hockey League.
Yeah, and I guess something you had brought up, the WHL, seeing this, and we'll leave you off with this actually, but 39 Manitobans drafted in the past draft. It's the most that have been selected from the province. So, I mean, that just adds on to the point that the talent here in Manitoba has truly arrived, and we're kind of seeing maybe the start of a golden age in talent here in Manitoba in this sport.
It could be just the age of the kids. It varies year to year in terms of the number of draftees. But this past year was a good year as far as our league was concerned. Other years not as good, right? So yeah, we just keep pushing forward. I think it's one of the broader problems in our league is that we unfortunately due to geographics have some weaker teams, and that reduces the competitiveness in the league a bit. And so we've been trying to deal with that. There's currently a committee struck by Hockey Manitoba that's looking at that very issue. And for example, the female program, AAA, they're going down to 6 teams next year, and open zone. So in other words, players in Manitoba can play basically try out for other teams other than in the area they live. And although Winnipeg is excluded from that. And so, there's a view of increasing the competitiveness of the league. There's also a view of possibly combining all of the elite programming, U15, U17, and U18 under one organizational body that reports to Hockey Manitoba, rather than being managed by currently the U17 and U15 programs managed by Hockey Winnipeg. So there's some changes organizationally potentially on down the road here, which will, in the long run, I believe, based on the time I've been involved, which has maybe been too long, improve the leagues overall. Really.
Yeah, and have heard rumblings about what you've talked about behind the scenes, about the changes that could be coming throughout different leagues here throughout the province. And yeah, I mean, for this league and the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League, we've known one thing for sure throughout, since I've been following it throughout these past few years,
Yeah.
any given year, it's always going to be a competitive and elite hockey league to be able to watch. Don
Yeah.
McIntosh from the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League joining this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. Don, always a pleasure, and hoping you and the rest of everyone in the league the best of luck again this season, 2025-2026.
Well, thank you very much.
And Don McIntosh, president of the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League, joining this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Terrico, Movement Fitness and Performance, Elite Prospects, goaltenders, as well as Can Central sports cards and memorabilia. And as for the U18 AAA Hockey League, as those are some stats from the MJHL, we'll take a look at more of those later on. But it's about the third week or so in this league. Seen some close games here, back to back actually. The Southwest Pembina Valley and Yellowhead and Central Plains both going to extra time near the start of this past weekend. But as the weekend picked up into Sunday, we saw some big wins from the Winnipeg Wild and the Brandon Wheat Kings. Southwest finishing off the week with a 4-1 win over Pembina Valley. Taking a look at the upcoming games for this week, which will be starting off the week tomorrow with Eastman taking on the Winnipeg Bruins That game's going to be at the Southeast Event Center in Steinbach. Pretty sweet venue. They'll be getting to play in there. And then we got a lone game Wednesday, day off Thursday, 2 games Friday, and then the real fun starts on Saturday, going into Sunday too. A lot of games this upcoming weekend in the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League. The standings, as we take a look at them, the Southwest Cougars, the only team. Well, actually, a few teams, but the only team with 4 wins out of them in Brandon, they don't have a regulation loss yet. They've only lost in extra time so far. The other undefeated teams, as we see here, the Winnipeg Wild, the Winnipeg Thrashers, also undefeated, and the Winnipeg Bruins, undefeated through their first game. The 2 winless teams, the Kenora Thistles and the Norman North Stars. But as we pick up, it's going to be interesting to see if the Winnipeg Bruins can keep their undefeated streak alive, even though it's only been 1 game, as me and Don talked about as well. But yeah, interesting to see if the Wild and Thrashers can continue their undefeated streaks, and for Southwest to keep that regulation loss column blank for the time being. Be sure to check out the Manitoba U18 AAA Hockey League website, as you can see the handle right there. Taking a look at the points so far, no one's been better than Cole Secord so far from the Pembina Valley Hawks. As Cole, he's started off with, well, an insane amount of points per game. His teammate in Carson Hebert right behind him with 13 points. But yeah, unbelievable start for some of these kids. Great goaltending so far in this league, and it's really shown in these teams' records so far. As yeah, full stats can be found on their website if you want to check them out for yourself. Cody Wall going to be joining the show next as we get into some MJHL talk, as the Manitoba Hockey Podcast continues here for Season 2, Episode 4. It's the voice of the Winkler Flyers in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, Cody Wall, joining this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. Cody, it's great to have you back on the program. For the Winkler Flyers, it's, unfamiliar start compared to recent years, I guess, as they start off 1-4-1 through their first 6 regular season games. You've had a chance to call a few so far. Your thoughts so far on what's gone down for them to start off the way they have?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on again, Graham. Always a pleasure to get a chance to get on with you here and talk a little bit of
Of
puck.
course.
Obviously, yeah, you mentioned it. Flyers started the season not the record they'd be looking for, but with speaking with a lot of the staff around the team, um, there was a lot of guys going in and out of the lineup from last year's team to this year's team. Obviously, not as bad as some teams in the league, but I believe they only returned 10 players from last year's squad, and only one of them being defense. So that's one thing that, at least early on, the Flyers have still been trying to figure out a bit is finding their defensive game. With a lot of fresh faces in the lineup, that's something that they've been starting to battle. And obviously, you get a lot of turnover. You get guys who haven't played with each other a lot. So that's something that also is building. But, from first game to, just the other night when they took on the Nighthawks, very different looking team from first game to their 6th game. And, it looks like a team that's building towards the right place.
Yeah, and of course, that most recent game, 5-4 loss to Niverville, whereas for the game before they lose 4-2. So you're right, getting that much closer to maybe seeing some more positive results in that win column. But as you mentioned, the goals against for this team, the defensive side of things and how it's been a struggle there so far. 27 goals against so far to start off, where last year this was the best team in their division with only 107 goals against. But given that this team won a championship 2 years removed from that, they make it to the semifinals last season, and of course, going into this year with a more inexperienced group, do you feel like this is the start of I guess let's just say what it is. Maybe not quite a rebuild, but a retool for this team.
Yeah, you know what? It's hard to say. I mean, like I said, it is early on in the season. Obviously, with junior hockey, there's so many moving parts. I mean, even just the other day, in the matter of a week, sorry, the Flyers have acquired three new defensemen. Two of them getting sent down from the WHL in Case and Fisher from the Everett Silvertips and Graham Pickering from the Red Deer Rebels. And I believe they just signed a guy out of the Null, Oliver Schrader. I believe I haven't had a chance to meet him, but I mentioned earlier the Flyers defense, something that they're still working on, and I think they're doing the right things here to retool, kind of like what you said, Graham, retool on the fly here because they do have a lot of offensive firepower. Just a matter of kind of figuring out their own zone and kind of working from their own zone out.
Yeah, and nice to know that they went out and added some experience and some skill to this year's squad, a squad that, like you said, saw a bit of turnover, quite a bit of turnover this past offseason. But, like you just mentioned, the offensive side of things, like you said, a lot to like, a lot of firepower up there. Can you dive more into what this year's type of offense could look like as we start to move forward here for the Winkler Flyers from what you've seen so far in the early stages?
Yeah, the Flyers look to have a good mix of different tools in their lineup. You know, they got guys like Nick Goodmanson, who is returning from last year's squad. He missed parts of last year due to injury, but among points per game, he was among the top five. You know, he's a guy who, you know, call a spade a spade. He's likely going to have a solid year. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see him put up 100 points. You know, he's got that kind of offensive upside. And then they got young guys who are coming in and contributing. They had big body and Connor Rieger last night contribute for his two first goals as a Flyer. Obviously, he a rookie with the Flyers coming in. He is a '07 born forward out from Saskatchewan. You know, he's a big body. He plays physical. He's the type of guy that's maybe going to get those greasy goals for you in those hard games. But again, he's a young forward, a guy who's going to still come into his own game. Defensively, offense is going to come, at least to this point, it's gone through their lone returning defenseman in Owen Wallace. I think he's really looked good for the Flyers as the lone returning defenseman. He's looked to have taken a leadership role, and he's taken these extra minutes. Where as last year he was a rookie defenseman on a very veteran-heavy decor. He got to learn off a lot of key defensemen on last year's squad. Obviously, their best winning record last year for the Flyers. So, for Owen Wallace, a guy who maybe was in a reserved role last year, he is currently has 5 assists through 6 games. He's a guy who is dishing the puck. He's taken that elevated role. He's playing physical game, and he's making sure he's not sacrificing defense. And the team is, like I said earlier, they're building and they're coming together as the season goes on.
For this Flyers goaltending situation this year, Cody, of course, they had the privilege last year of having a player like Liam Ernst to backstop this team. Leif Ekblad comes back, who played in about 12 games last year, had a near perfect record with 11 wins. He comes in as he's going to be touted as more of the starter this year. I'm thinking he probably gets more games given he has more experience than rookie goaltender Liam Russell, who looks to back him up. Take me through your thoughts on their goaltending this season, heading in with Ekblad projected to have a high role.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of Russell. I've seen him in limited minutes just through training camp preseason, and I believe he's got into one game so far this year. But you mentioned Leif Ekblad. He's a guy who came in last year. He did kind of take on the backup role, but as the season progressed, he showed great numbers and he really challenged Ernst for that starting job, so much so that when Ernst did have a little bit of falter in last playoffs for the Flyers, Ekblad came in and I forget what his save percentage is, but I believe it was a 191 goals against through the 4 or 5 games in the playoffs last year. Obviously, this year, bit of a I've mentioned it, the rookie and younger defensive core, and that's something that he didn't have last year. Obviously, a solid record of 11-0-1 through the regular season. This year, a little bit of growing pains with that defensive core, and with that, we've seen the shot volume that he's seen gone up. And the quality of shots. Last year you had a very expert decor that would keep a lot of the high danger chances to the outside. And that's something that the Flyers are working towards. As mentioned, still a very young decor, and they're going to build. And I believe Ekblad, once he gets settled in, and once the decor gets settled in, those numbers will start to climb up. I believe right now he's at an 868 save percentage and a three or so goals against. Those aren't the numbers that obviously he was maybe touting last year, but still, a very big-bodied goaltender. He takes up a lot of the net. I believe he's listed at 6'6". So once he gets down into that butterfly, he does take up so much of the net, and you do have to have either a greasy goal or sometimes a perfectly placed shot, as we saw in last night's Neverville game. He just got beat by a couple perfect shot there, I believe, for Neverville to tie it up, and then also, you get a couple of scrambles, and those don't look too good on the stat sheet either. But you can't fault the goalie when sometimes you have a breakdown in a play.
Yeah, and for Leaf Ekblad, of course, he's actually at a 905 save percentage to start things off this season. And yeah, has faced a lot of shots, but like we've mentioned, this Flyers team looking to continue to build towards more positive things as the season goes along. As for the team that took them out last year, Cody, ended up sweeping this Winkler Flyers team, the Northern Manitoba Blizzard. They're also, I guess, in a similar situation, quite a bit of turnover on their roster. This team, of course, went on to win the league championship last season. They've started off 0-3-1. Not sure how much you've had a chance to follow them, but given that you saw them most recently last postseason, just your thoughts on that team from, I guess, last year and the start they've had this year so far.
Yeah, you know what? Sometimes with championship level teams, especially at this level, you see those rosters sometimes get picked through. What? Taking a look at last year's team compared to the roster that they're boasting for this year, there's only 3 returning players from last year's championship squad, and that's a lot to throw on those guys who last year were in their first or second years. So to essentially roll out pretty much a whole new squad, that's a tall ask. Obviously, the Norman Blizzard were led by very strong goaltending from Tate Timmerman, and his solid play through the MJHL playoffs and into the Centennial Cup earned him a chance to start the season with the Saskatoon Blades. I believe he has now since been dealt over to the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, maybe just for, I guess, to be in closer proximity if he gets the call up there. So obviously his solid play has earned the looks from some WHL squads, as well as a number of other players, I think, getting either graduating out from that Norman team or, getting the big call up, as I believe Benson Hurst, another guy who played some time and played a significant role with that Norman Blizzard championship winning team, I believe. Not sure which team he, I believe, is playing with in the WHL, but I believe he also earned a call up after some solid playing time.
Yeah, that would be Moose Jaw, and yeah, it's quite a story for Benson Hurst, who started out actually in Pilot Mountain Hockey Academy when he started to get recognized. Went over to Prairie, and then over to, of course, the Northern Blizzard last year, Northern Manitoba Blizzard, and then yeah, he gets recognized for the WHL, and the development, it just continues for this Northern Manitoba Blizzard squad, like we've talked about with the Flyers, Cody. I mean, this team able to win a championship. Now they have a chance to have a building year, and who knows if it comes together for them. Maybe we start to see them see more success this year. But uh, one last question before we talk about the upcoming games for the Flyers, but doesn't that just speak to how great this league is for you to come in and if you prove yourself, you can earn these opportunities like you just mentioned in the WHL?
Yeah, and I think part of that also does go back to some of the fluidity that comes with the WHL, and I think even you got the NCAA rule change. I think it opened up the floodways for a lot of different players. We saw last year Raiden Legal started off with the Niverville Nighthawks, another solid uh, season from him there. And then he was all prior committed to, believe, Bemidji for uh, was supposed to be for this season, but with the rule change in the WHL, NCAA eligibility, he's a guy who got the call up, had a really great run with Everett Silvertip. Started off with the back as the backup, and I believe he's now kind of thrust himself into the starting role, even into the playoffs last year with the Silvertips. But I think, yeah, the changes and some of the stuff that's been going on in the hockey landscape has opened it up for guys to come into junior hockey, and maybe you don't see the guys who play the 4 years. You maybe see guys play one or two, and then try and make that jump from there. It's really interesting to see what the fallout from some of these rule changes have been, and what it does for certain players.
For sure. And yeah, big changes. I mean, NCAA and WHL junior hockey in general. The big news that, it went down a little while ago now, but yeah, in terms of just the development side of the games, we're seeing more and more organizations seemingly going, I guess, with more younger talent and these kids getting better and better with the diets they're on, the workout plans, and their skill set, looking to take the jump earlier. And congratulations to the players that have done so. But for the Winkler Flyers, Cody, they got some home cooking coming up. The 7th, they play the Monarchs, so that's actually coming up tomorrow night. You're going to be on the call there as well as on Thanksgiving Sunday on the 12th, and then the 14th, they also face off against the Selkirk Steelers, who is the team they're playing on Sunday. But yeah, take me through these next few games for the Flyers, playing a really good squad in Selkirk, notably, who's 8-0 through their first 8 games.
Yeah, starting off with the Monarchs, it'll be interesting to see. They're a team that has been building these last couple of years. Obviously, they rebranded from the Winnipeg Freeze, but they've made a lot of good changes there, and they're committed to icing a very solid squad. It doesn't look like they've gotten the results that they've been looking for at this point in the season, but I know, judging from last year's squad and just seeing the fight from them, and a lot of the guys returning from those last year's teams. You imagine those guys going to take a step. They're going to be a little bit harder to play against, and then you look at Selkirk. They're off to another hot start. I believe last year they started the year 10-0, and it is actually the Flyers who gave them their first loss last year when they had that hot start. Obviously, with the start that the Flyers have got, that's probably something they want on their bingo card, is to maybe spoil the parade for the Selkirk Steelers. But yeah, they've had a great start. They've been led by a number of young bucks there. I believe Rowan Guevara leads the league in points with 21 points in I believe 9 games. So obviously he's another guy last year off to a great start in his rookie season. Yeah, 21.5 goals, 16 assists in 8 games for Guevara. So he's going to be an interesting guy to keep an eye on. I'm not sure where he is committed to, but I know he has already had a D1 commit.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And yeah, looking back at last year, it's looking like deja vu. Hopefully, for Selkirk's sake, they're probably hoping they don't crash and burn like they did last year in the standings as it went along. Ended up missing the playoffs, but another hot start for them. They're 8-0. They'll be rolling into Winkler, Manitoba, come this Sunday, where Cody Wall's going to be on the call for that one. Cody, it's always a pleasure getting to talk to you, man. You continue to get better at this. I appreciate you for coming on and being a guest. And yeah, best of luck this season, calling the Flyers games, and we'll chat soon.
Yep. Thanks, Graeme, for having me on, and always a pleasure.
And always great to be joined by my good friend Cody Wall, joining this week's edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast, which, by the way, will be back again next Monday for an all-new edition of this show. But yeah, we still got stuff to talk about for this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. We'll go back to the MJHL as, yeah, we take a look back at the scores from the start of October, which was back on Wednesday. Of course, Winkler Flyers losing in a close one there on OT on Sunday, as they fared a bit better than their 4-2 loss they had in Niverville on Friday night. As for the Niverville Nighthawks, we take a look at their past few games, really strong from them, as Niverville is going to be back in action coming up on, let's taking a look at the dates, I believe. So on Friday, as they'll be in Neepawa's territory at Yellowhead Center to take on the Titans. As for the Selkirk Steelers, they won't be back in action until the 11th, when they'll be taking on the Steinbach Pistons in Selkirk. That's coming up on Saturday night, where it could potentially be the battle of two unbeaten teams in regulation. As for Steinbach, they'll be heading into this upcoming week of action with no regulation losses, only one loss on the board for them so far, and that came in overtime. By the way, for the Winkler Flyers, they're going to be in action on Sunday against Niverville, where Niverville is also undefeated at 5-0 heading into this week's action. In terms of the stats leaders, as Cody Wall mentioned, Rowan Guevara with a ridiculous amount of points, 21 points in 8 games played so far. That's good enough for 2.63 points per game, and he's not the only one lighting it up for this team. Wyatt Witham and Griffin Crone, both with over 2 points per game, or just as at that, as we can see. Ben Roulette for Weiwei Capo, very nice through 7 games, as he's also had 2 points per game. As for the goaltending, Ryan Vellon for Portage, no one's been better than him so far. He's only got 3 goals against in 4 games played, 2 shutouts. Incredible stuff there from the 05 goaltender. A few rookies on this top 10 list too. If you want to check out the full stats, be sure to check it out at mjhl.ca. Something interesting that Don McIntosh brought up, and that's in terms of how the landscape of AAA may very well be changing going into next season, so 2026, 2027. I will say this about the female side of things, that from what I've heard from my sources on that, that hasn't been fully determined yet. I believe there's going to be a vote on it, but that's all I'll say about that. I've been wanting to hold off on that because nothing is official, but Don's kind of broken some news and thought I'd like to clarify some things. But yeah, no matter what the changes are, I'll say this. Obviously, when you take a look at Saskatchewan teams and Manitoban teams, I think when looking at the male side of things, we've seen teams like the Brandon Wheat Kings, the Winnipeg Wild. They've been consistent contenders, and those have been strong programs that have been, of course, built up throughout the course of time in this league. And of course, Brandon ended up representing the West region 2 seasons ago when they had that ridiculous historical season. But I know on the female side of things, for the past little while, in terms of when it comes to the West Regional, the Saskatchewan team has been able to get the better of the Manitoban winners. And a big thing in Saskatchewan, as I brought it up with Dawn, is that they're not bound to regions as opposed to here in Manitoba where teams are bound to regions. And of course, the teams in Winnipeg, more times than not, are going to be stronger than the teams from outside of the capital of Manitoba, right? Throughout time, and we've seen it. Team areas like Norman, areas like Kenora, areas like the Central Plains, the Yellowheads. It's a bit tougher for them to bring in talent. Not sure if I just mentioned them, but the Interlake Lightning as well. So whatever changes are made, it would be nice to see, these types of areas, these groups get even stronger if they're able to pair together. But the one big question I have, and maybe someone can answer this, but at the end of the day, these programs, aren't they about developing programs, developing these areas? And if you combine these groups, maybe it's about just narrowing it down and picking the strongest kids to represent these programs. I get it. But going to be interesting to see how it changes the development landscape of things, because that's what I'm interested to think about. Like, my question, I guess, would be, yeah, it's supposed to make every team stronger, but what about the teams that are outside of Winnipeg? Does that kind of set the mark for, more people to want to try out for Winnipeg teams or go sign with those teams if, one of the options would be Manitoba doesn't end up having themselves bound to regions? And then what does that do for, maybe the less bigger areas in the province, the teams that aren't Winnipeg, the teams that maybe aren't as appealing to play in certain places? So yeah, I'm interested to see how all of that kind of sorts itself out. The goal, I guess, would be to be more competitive in the West Regionals parts of the season, and maybe to just have stronger teams. And I get it, there's some areas where the talent pool isn't as strong as others, but yeah, does this really solve the issue? Will, those weaker areas that would be combining, are they going to get the same benefits as the teams from, the bigger areas like the Winnipegs, the programs that are more established like the Brandon Wheat Kings? A lot to be answered here, I guess, coming up once we get into thinking about next season, which would be 2026-2027. But as for this season, there's still a lot to talk about, as I'm sure there's going to be plenty throughout the months here from October all the way till about April is when we see things around the sport in the province start to truly wrap up. And then, of course, we start to focus into next season. But as for one of the university programs here in the province, I guess the male side of the one major university program we have in the sport of hockey, the Manitoba Bisons, they ended up playing against Lakehead University. This was a while ago, but I just want to show you this once again. U of M faring pretty well, a 5-1 win and then a 6-2 loss, but all of that was in preparation for their game against the Manitoba Moose. As for the Bisons, they ended up, only losing 7-5 to not Team Manitoba, to the Manitoba Bisons of the AHL. And yeah, this game ended up happening not at Canada Life Center, but at the Hockey for All Center, so a practice facility that, of course, the Jets use and many teams in this province use to play on. But yeah, this happened last Wednesday on October 1st, and it's a part of U of M's preseason schedule as they got it underway back on the 19th. So right now they played 5 games, and their most recent game coming against a little pro hockey team, which that is of tradition. Yeah, U of M usually does play the Moose a few times. The next time they'll play the Moose is going to be coming up on Monday, October 6th. So that's actually happening right now, tonight, at the Canada Life Center. And we'll report on that game once we do get scores from it. But will be interesting to see how they fare against the Moose, what type of players the Moose are addressing in that game, because the cuts that have been made by the Jets, them sending players down, a lot of talent projected to be on this year's Manitoba Moose squad in the AHL. Continuing on with some U of M news, the women's team ended up naming their captains. Dana Gertzen will be wearing the C for this year's Bison's program, with Louise Ferguson, Julia Bird, and Sophia Anderson donning the A's this season. This was announced, I believe, over the weekend, pretty recently, by the Bison's W Hockey account. So their women's hockey account, be sure to check it out on Instagram. That is, of course, their handle in the top left corner. But for this U of M squad, which is going to be led by this leadership group this season, fared pretty well last year, making it to the semifinals, so the Final Four in the Canada West playoffs. They've played a few preseason games for themselves already, but hasn't been recent at that for this U of M women's program, as the last time they've played a competitive exhibition game at that would be on September 14th, so a few weeks ago now. They're going to be in action, though, against that most recent opponent they played in the Regina Cougars back on the 14th. They take them on to open up their season in Wayne Fleming Arena this Friday coming up. They also take on the Regina Cougars in a second game in a back-to-back on early Saturday evening at 5 p.m. Both games at Wayne Fleming Arena. And yeah, be sure to catch it online if you're unable to make it into the rink at Wayne Fleming Arena to watch that one on the Canada West streaming service. I'm sure you can find that on U of M's website, which of course is gobisons.ca. But 2 weeks ago now, last week, as my time's kind of wonky in my head, but last week on Tuesday, on September 30th, it was National Truth and Reconciliation Day, a day to reflect and to just, I guess, remember the same word, but yeah, we'll go with a day to reflect. The day to reflect, to honor those that unfortunately lost their life to the atrocities in residential schools, to honor the survivors as well that have been able to make it out. And I think just this day, a day to really think and consider everything that has happened in our past as a country to the Indigenous community truly isn't right. And, just learning about it and reading about it, as time has gone along, it's pretty tough to see. So I couldn't even imagine. For myself, I'm fully European ancestry. I got some Scottish in me as well. but no Indigenous blood, but being able to learn about their culture and the atrocities of what's happened. It's sad, and I think a day like this, having a day like that, is the very least we can do as a country, to remember. And I think it's important not to forget, as I've heard some in the Indigenous community say, and I do totally agree. Of course, it is in the past. And I know that there's going to be arguments out there that, well, it didn't affect me and it's nothing that I did. But, it's a terrible cycle, and it's something that I hope ends someday. Like, the abuse from that, it's, has a trickle-down effect going into the lives of those that have been affected and affecting those of the loved ones that have been affected. And to their family, like, it's just awful stuff that went down. And I think that just moving forward, you hope that the reconciliation and everything involving that day, and the fight for justice throughout time, you hope that that community can finally find peace someday. But I will say this, to see the support from the teams from throughout the province, one in particular, so we'll get to that in just a moment, sorry, but one in particular in, I believe it's the Winnipeg Avros. Yes, there we are, wearing their orange shirts on Truth and Reconciliation Day, to, of course, remember and honor those that have fallen due to the atrocities, and to those who have survived and are still affected today by the vicious cycle caused by residential schools. It's great to see the hockey community, the teams and stuff coming together to do stuff like this. And it was also great to see the many faces that had come together for what was called Coming Together, an initiative started by teams, and many other teams followed suit by donating money to Cancer Care Manitoba, that foundation. As we can see there, some groups, some teams donated upwards of $30,000. Some celebrities here in Manitoba ended up making appearances. Notably, Josh Morrissey was in attendance. The man in the Bruins jersey, the jersey with a C on it, that is the dad of Carter Wilson. It's Dave Wilson who's in that picture, but he was there. His son, Carter, unfortunately lost his life, losing his battle to brain cancer this summer. Great night to honor those that, like Carter, who ended up tragically passing away during the summer, but to also see the amount of money that's been raised towards fighting cancer. And this night, the main reason that this was put together was for Peyton Chornley, who unfortunately is in a battle with cancer herself. And this game by her teammates from RHA was put on by them, and it was them taking on Balmoral Hall. It was great to see the amount of festivities, to the amount of teams that were out there. They even got some live music, some live entertainment. That was fantastic to see. One of Manitoba's best photographers, Daryl Gershman, snapped all these wonderful pictures. So shout out to him for his work here in the province, but also for letting us use his pictures. In terms of the band, it's a play on the Tragically Hip. as their name is, just taking a look, trying to find it, but unable to, as, yeah, but all this money, I mean, seeing the teams that were able to raise the amount of money they did to raise awareness for this cause, it was special to see all of those pictures and all of these teams coming together. Can't find the name of that band off the top of my head. Was trying to remember it, think of it, should have written it down, but the way she goes, I'm sure they put on a show for a great cause, and shout out to all the teams that were involved in this initiative, being able to raise money for Peyton Chorley, for cancer care, Manitoba Foundation, and those affected by this awful disease that have taken way too many throughout time. Yeah, there's been also one last thing that has ended up happening, and I think this is one of the best stories so far this year. But we mentioned Carter Wilson, the player who had tragically lost his life due to brain cancer this past summer, in August. Well, what his team has done in the St. Vital Junior Victoria is one of the best things you can do in this situation as a hockey team, when it comes to just in terms of playing games. It's keeping Carter's memory alive this season on their team, keeping him on their roster, and by doing that, they're also able to make him the captain. This season for the Victorias will be dedicated to Carter Wilson. Carter Rush Wilson, as Rush was, I believe, his nickname. And yeah, the Victorias will be having his jersey on their bench all season long. Still going with 4 assistants, but leaving the C open for a teammate who I'm sure will be watching over them all season long, wherever he may be now. But yeah, we're going to throw it to one last commercial break here. Just noticed there's been a lot of talking. Haven't gone to a commercial break since the very start of the show, I believe. But yeah, we'll end off with some final words coming up next on this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast.
Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia offers the widest selection of sports cards and signed memorabilia in the city. For dedicated casual and new collectors, Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia has everything a collector could ask for. Everything we sell is stored with care, and with help from our knowledgeable team, we'll help you find exactly what you're looking for. We carry Upper Deck hockey card brands like Series 1 and 2, The Cup, Ultimate, SPA, and plenty more. So what are you waiting for? Come down to Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia, Winnipeg's premier sports cards and memorabilia store.
And welcome back to this edition of the Manitoba Hockey Podcast. This is where we're going to say so long, but before we do that, I want to thank Don McIntosh and Cody Wall for being the guest on this week's episode. I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in as well, and making this one a special one as always. And to Movement, Fitness, and Performance, Elite Prospects, Goaltenders, Can Central Sports Cards and Memorabilia, and Terrico for sponsoring another edition of the MB Hockey Podcast. Next time we'll be in action, we'll be, live for Thanksgiving Monday, as we'll have news from around the leagues that we've been talking about, may introduce some more leagues into the fold. But yeah, stay tuned for next week's episode. We may have guests, we may not, may just be a solo edition. But yeah, plenty still to come on our network this week. We got the MMJHL podcast coming out at some point tomorrow, the Buffaloes podcast, the official Pilot Mountain Hockey Academy podcast coming out on Wednesday, first ever Winnipeg High School Hockey League game broadcast coming up on Wednesday as well. And on Thursday too. We'll also have MMJHL game day content and MFHL game day content all for you. As we got a busy weekend of games ahead of us on Thanksgiving weekend, but until after Thanksgiving weekend, or I guess at the end of Thanksgiving weekend on Thanksgiving Monday, 7 days from now, we'll see you then, Manitoba hockey fans. Graeme the G Show Forsyth saying so long, everybody. Take care.